Real quick, I'll give you the 30,000 foot version. There's a lot more in the book Hooked, which you can see behind me, that has exercises and a lot more than we have time for today. But basically, the 4 basic steps that we see in all sorts of habit forming products, online and offline, are these 4 basic steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and finally an investment. So trigger, there are 2 types of triggers: external triggers and internal triggers. Internal triggers are the promised land. Internal triggers are what we are trying to get to. If you can get your product to attach to some kind of internal emotional state, this is, if there's one takeaway from today's talk that I want everybody to remember, is that there's only one reason why people use any product or service. It doesn't matter what your product or service is, there's only one reason, and that reason is to modulate our mood, to make us feel something different. So the first step in building a habit-forming product is to understand what is that itch, what's the internal trigger, what's the uncomfortable emotional state that your customers turn to with sufficient frequency to alleviate with your product. Some examples. When we're lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check the news or YouTube or stock prices or sports scores. All of these things cater to an uncomfortable emotional state. And it doesn't matter if your product is an enterprise, if it's a service, if it's a product, doesn't matter. It has to understand, you have to understand what is that internal trigger, that emotional state. Then the next step is the action phase. So this is the simplest thing done in anticipation of a reward. And your job as the product maker is to reduce the friction to doing the action you want the user to do. And there's lots and lots of ways that we can reduce friction, but that's the most important lesson. We can get into the details in a bit. This is actually where trust is super important, because if the user has to think before they use your product, is this product gonna be here next month? And are they gonna do the right thing with my information? And do I trust this company? That is what we call cognitive friction or cognitive load. And that's where they will not progress if they don't trust you. So that's where trust would fall into the action phase. The next phase is called the variable reward phase. And this is where the user gets what they came for. If they don't trust, their psychological itch is scratched. And what we find is that these habit-forming products, they use what's called an intermittent reinforcement. This is a variable reward. So it's not that you give the customer what they want every single time. It's that there's a bit of uncertainty, a bit of mystery around what they might find, which in fact scratches the user's itch. But there's unpredictability there. And there's a lot of really interesting psychology around variable rewards. We see them in all sorts of things. Of course, we see them in casinos, we see them in sports matches, we see them everywhere. Everything that's engaging, a good book, a good movie, and of course your news feed, all of these things utilize variable rewards. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the investment phase, the last step of the hook. This is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of some kind of future benefit.